Hi, I'm Lindsay Green-Barber. I'm the founder and CEO of Impact Architects. We do strategy and research with media companies, journalism organizations, and philanthropic supporters of news and information to develop and measure high impact reporting strategies and audience engagement strategies. Over the past year or so, I've had the pleasure of partnering with the Constructive Institute to think about the impact of constructive journalism. About a year ago, just before the pandemic, we set out to design a research process to see what do we know about the impact of constructive journalism. That research was altered in the wake of the pandemic, but we were very pleased to be able to do part of that this year. There are two phases. First, we did a literature review focusing on scholarship in Europe and the United States. We also did primary research with newsroom interviews across Europe. We do hope to do a phase 2 in the coming year to broaden the geography of the research and to include more newsrooms and also to add in some audience research. I'll talk more about that at the end. And we do hope that some of you all will want to participate in that project. So just super briefly, what did we find in a literature review? In other words, what do we already know about the impact of constructive journalism from research that's been done inside of academia and in industry? We looked again in Europe and in the United States, mostly due to time constraints at this point. But what we found in this research is that constructive journalism seems to prompt news consumers or audiences to think more critically about solutions to problems. Researchers have found that constructive journalism emits positive emotions from news consumers, and that solutions-oriented reporting can actually result in more positive feelings of the news consumer, the audience person, towards the news organization itself. We've also found in the United States that solutions journalism increases individual sense of self-efficacy and intent to take action, meaning audiences are more likely to go and do something with information if it's come through a solutions-oriented story. But the real focus of this work was the primary research, where we did interviews with 13 newsrooms and across Europe. The interviews were 45 to 60 minutes, and I'd like to recognize my colleagues Ellen Heinrichs and Alexandra Hatterlein, who conducted interviews in the German newsrooms in German language, and their findings are grouped together with ours here. So one of the things we wanted to know is just what are people's motivation inside of newsrooms? What are these leaders thinking, and why are they introducing constructive practices in the newsroom and building processes around that? And nearly all leaders said that they were initially attracted to the constructive approach because they saw the unintended, sometimes negative consequences that were coming out of increasingly rapid and negative news, particularly with the advent of the internet. So this story was kind of a common thread across all of these leaders, and they're looking for a new approach. For many, it was something that happened kind of organically, and then they found the constructive movement and were able to find processes and language to put around the kind of feelings that they were already having. We then looked at what is the editorial strategy. So if you want to have more constructive reporting, how do you actually then implement that inside of a news organization? And we had news organizations that are large and small, public media, publicly funded media, private commercial media, nonprofits. So it really ran the gamut. And we heard kind of three main ways that constructive journalism is integrated into editorial strategy. One, it's programmatic. So particularly for larger newsrooms where you have many programs, think TV stations, there may be one program or one segment of a program that is consistently constructive journalism. There's also periodic reporting. So rather than it being, every day this program runs or every day this segment runs that's constructive, it may be more, we're doing a story, and as we report it out, we recognize that it would benefit from a more constructive or solutions-oriented kind of lens. And these two things aren't mutually exclusive. You can, of course, have both of these happening at the same time. And then there's the pervasive approach. So when constructive journalism is part of all reporting and permeates the organizational culture. This means it's integrated into meetings. It's the structure actually of reporting within a newsroom. And when we asked, well, how do you get there? How do you get a program? How do you get a pervasive kind of a culture of constructive reporting inside of a newsroom, where that may not be journalists' kind of first instinct? We heard two things. One, that trainings were necessary but not sufficient. So many newsrooms said that they have periodic trainings, or that they would kind of refer their staff to different types of resources out there. But they said that wasn't really sufficient to affect an internal culture shift. So in addition to the trainings, these leaders said that they really needed to shift the whole approach of the newsroom. And in these cases, they say, in meetings and when they're having story selection processes, they add questions to these saying, what perspectives are not included that we should be including? What's the long-term trend, rather than what is the top line breaking piece of news or information? This is particularly, cited when thinking about things like crime, climate. We get lots of kind of bad top line news when research comes out, but if we put it in a longer context, we might have a different story. And they also ask questions like, what solutions have others developed to the challenges that are being uncovered in reporting, particularly in investigative reporting? One thing to note here is that in terms of culture shift, most of these newsroom leaders also said that they don't explicitly use the word constructive journalism. Slightly less so in the German context, where they said that language and the words were used a bit more frequently. But it seems like different newsrooms use different language and kind of have their own internal ways of talking about this type of reporting. But it all comes back to that more perspectives, a longer term lens, and thinking about solutions to stories. And then finally, we wanted to know, what do we know? what questions do we have about the effect of constructive journalism on audiences? And newsroom leaders say that they believe the constructive approach is building brand value and loyalty among their audiences. They say kind of anecdotally that they see deeper engagement with digital content. And in some cases, they've been able to tie, again, at least anecdotally, increased revenue, particularly for those that are working with a subscription or membership model, to their more constructive approach to reporting. Most newsrooms are not actually labeling stories as constructive. They say it's more about, giving a holistic view of what's going on to their audiences, and that it doesn't have its own separate kind of vertical or a label that goes to it. Instead, it's integrated in content across the board. And while newsrooms use all kinds of different analytics to think about audience reach and engagement, based on the platform and based on their own audience behavior, none that were interviewed for this project have explicitly compared constructive stories, the analytics, with constructive content compared with non-constructive or daily breaking news content. There were some who were able to say, well, we had a big constructive project and we did kind of pull out those analytics and compare them, and we saw how there was more engagement with that content, but it was either in that kind of one-off case study or very anecdotal. And beyond that type of thinking about audience behavior, no other newsrooms had done any kind of explicit research or audience research about the effects of constructive journalism in their audiences. One thing I will say, though, is that many anecdotally talked about the type of feedback that they hear from audiences, both requests for more constructive content and kind of gratitude and praise for that content that is coming out, that's giving a more holistic picture of what's going on in the world. So that brings us to, what are the gaps in knowledge? What is the net impact of constructive journalism, and where are we going to go next to try to answer that question? There are some things that we think we know, again, often anecdotally or maybe a bit more than anecdotes, but we don't have hard answers. So we think that constructive journalism results in audience loyalty, and we'd love to know more about that. We think constructive journalism contributes to organizational financial sustainability, but there's a lot to dig into there. And we think constructive journalism results in more constructive public debate or conversation. But newsrooms really were only able to point to this in kind of anecdotal ways, and many shared that they have that same question and they would love to do some deeper learning. Which brings us to phase 2 of the research. Where are we going with this next? Our hope is to broaden the geographic scope outside of Europe and also to broaden the scope of newsrooms within Europe that participate in this project. We'd love to compare those analytics that newsrooms are using in a more systematic way to see, what do we learn about audience engagement with constructive content compared with non-constructive content. We'd love to do some more audience surveys or focus groups, especially among paying members and subscribers of newsrooms, to just better understand what is the effect of constructive journalism in those audience people, and how does it affect their relationship with the newsroom. And then we love to do some more case studies to see, what does this look like at a societal level? How does increased constructive reporting actually contribute to more constructive public debates? So those are our plans for 2021, hopefully. And if you or your newsrooms are interested in participating, please reach out to the Constructive Institute or to us at Impact Architects, and we would love to include you in this work. Thank you so much for your time.